Larry, some examples that the committee is doing to educate people in our community about the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King.
Well, I think our programming best is the best answer to that question. And by that, I simply mean that over the years, our programs have, particularly the Saturday program, I mentioned having gone to the Historical Society this year, but that Saturday program is specifically aimed at educating folks in some area of the struggle for black people to achieve freedom, justice, and equality here in the United States. So this year we went to the Historical Society. In the past, we've taken groups to the Schomburg Museum in Harlem. We've even recreated specific incidents from the civil rights movement in programs that we held, for example, at School 1 year, at Union Baptist Church, and at Mount Teman AME Church. So,
and we had that actor one year at the library.
Right.
It was
so
really good.
Those are the kinds of things that we do that we feel certainly educates our people and the citizenry of Elizabeth about the legacy of Dr. King and the civil rights movement.
Reverend Adair, as a pastor and a former president of the NAACP, what do you think the overall impact of the committee effort is on our community, and how do you get some feedback on that?
Well, first of all, I commend Mr. Body for hanging in there as long as he has, because it's certainly important for us to remember the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And so far as being the president or past president of NAACP here in Elizabeth, I'm a 45-year resident of this city. I remember.
I didn't ask your age.
Well, and I can remember right here in Elizabeth, Mayor, where there were certain neighborhoods that we could not walk in. And again, I stated earlier that it's very important for us to challenge our young people and the community at large to not forget of the gains and not take for granted people who gave their life toward this struggle. What I've tried to do in the 4 years that I was the president of NAACP is not only fight for the rights of African Americans, but for all people. That's what Dr. King was about.
Larry, in August of this year, it'll be 44 years since Dr. King delivered his I Have a Dream speech in Washington. What do you think Dr. King would think about the efforts today compared to the way it was 44 years ago?
Well, I think in some aspects, Dr. King would be happy, but I think in other respects he would be very dismayed and saddened. I think he would be happy about the progress that black folks have made in terms of taking advantage of educational opportunities that came about as a result of the civil rights movement, particularly in the 70s, and the fact that when black folks began to go to college in great numbers and graduate, that the doors of corporate America opened for a lot of them, and a lot of them went in, and now we have blacks represented in all walks of life in our country. On the other hand, I think he would be dismayed by the fact that after that we had a kind of breakup of the black family, and with that came, as a result of that, we have this youth violence and gangs. I think he'd be terribly saddened by that. I think he'd also be disappointed when we look at the nation as a whole. I think he would say that we didn't learn certain lessons that he was trying to teach us. His whole message on peace and getting out of Vietnam. You know, if you read the speech that he gave at Riverside Church back in 1968, you'll find out that he said that if we didn't learn from that, the mistakes made by going into Vietnam, that we'd be fighting those types of wars forever. And you look at Iraq, and it's kind of almost the same thing.
Was that the speech, Larry, just before he passed?
Yeah. And in fact, I said 1968. It was 1967, actually, and 1 year later, he was dead. I think he would also be disappointed. You know, at the very end there, Dr. King was talking about economic justice. He felt that all Americans ought to have the ability or the opportunity to to go to work and to make a decent living, a decent wage. And we look at America now, and the gap between rich and poor is wider now than it ever has been. You look at the homeless. You look at the fact that we still don't have health insurance, and we're the greatest nation on earth. Those kinds of things Dr. King would be very dismayed about. But at the same time, I think he'd be out there on the front lines fighting a lot harder than the fight is being waged right now.
Reverend Adair, do you see some of that in the church as far as, lost opportunities or people thinking doors are closed, and how do we open these doors in economic justice? I remember some of Martin Luther King's speeches towards the end with the Memphis garbage strike.
Yeah, right.
And that was all. That wasn't about civil rights, even though it was, but it was more about economic justice.
Right.
I think you're right, Mayor. The church definitely has to get back to opening up its doors 7 days a week for the community. I'm one that believes that our solution does not rest in political power or any other kind of power other than the power that comes from loving through Jesus Christ. I'm a pastor, that's what I believe in. I think that we as a church have failed our people, because if you look at the church in America, it's a church of prosperity now. Most of the messages that you hear on prosperity, and a lot of times they make people feel that if you're not rich or prosperous, Jesus don't love you or God doesn't love you. I think, and one of the things that I can't speak for anybody else here in Elizabeth or anywhere else, but one of the things I've tried to do as long as I've been pastor is opening up our doors. We're going to start an after-school program where we're teaching kids everything from computer to mathematical skills to hygiene and history. The doors are going to be open. It's going to be free to the public, and we need to get back. And I'm going to say this might be controversial for some people, but the church is really still the only major player in the black community. The church. That's where we.
Well, when I've lectured at Kane University, I've said on numerous occasions that the civil rights, without the black church, the civil rights movement would have never existed.
Never existed.
And it was through the communication of the black church, because you were basically locked out of the mainstream media.
And it bothers me when
So
pastors and churches can't come together on the issue of taking care of the people. It bothers me. There's something wrong there.
Larry, some of the people you worked with in the past on this are no longer with us. Steve Sanson, former Councilman Charlie Harris, and others. Especially Steve. He brought a lot of things, pictures, books, articles that he shared with us on numerous occasions. Where is this material? Did you get to keep any of it? Is it still used for these events and these celebrations?
I have some of the material. When Mr. Sampson passed, I had he was a mentor for me. In fact, I don't even think I would have ever been involved had it not been for him.
Well, you've told that story on the show in the past about the barbershop and the history lessons that not only you got, but a lot of young people, young men got going to his barbershop, because girls probably weren't allowed there.
No, girls were allowed. But when he passed, his wife Ruby gave me what I would describe as a kind of treasure chest of memorabilia. And in that, there are articles from when the nation was going through its civil rights movement. Elizabeth was part of that. And there were demonstrations right here in Elizabeth. And so there were articles from the old Elizabeth Daily Journal that his wife gave me. She also gave me some of his books. And she even gave me some of, Mr. Sampson, especially during Black History Month, he would always wear his African attire.
She wore it on the show here.
Yeah, right. And she even gave me some of that, and because a lot of that is one size fits all. So I have some of his African attire, and as a matter of fact, I wore it during the month of December during Kwanzaa.